In Halifax, on Canada's east coast, and in whose waters the Titanic sank, one of the world's most famous train journeys begins, on the Canadian Railway, a journey across the North American continent. The rail connection from east to west, which includes the crossing of the Rocky Mountains, marked the first major construction of a new era, a railroad that stretches for 6,000 kilometers. The journey begins in the ocean. Whilst traveling to the first station on the long journey, the conductor gives a short informative talk on the history of the Canadian Railway. The train has several viewing wagons, as well as a comfortable bar and leisure compartments. Soon we arrive at the first leg of the journey. Ville-du Québec, capital of Canada's likewise named largest province. A majestic and dominant landmark, the world-famous Chateau Frontenac overlooks the Francophile city. The innate art of the city's original inhabitants, the Inuits, still makes its mark today. The funicular travels from the upper town to the lower town, the Petit Champlain Quarter. The illuminated train station is like a palace of a long-forgotten era. In poor weather, the day trip continues to Montreal. Modern train facilities with excellent levels of both service and comfort are the main reason behind Canadian Railway's well-deserved reputation. The massive Basilica of St. Joseph's Oratory is one of the main sites in Canada's second largest city. In 1535, Jacques Cartier occupied this region for the French king, and in 1642, Montreal was established. Today's Montreal is one of the most modern cities in the world, with a fascinating combination of both old and new, including a vast underground city and the old-style home hill, European charm and the American way of life. And soon the journey resumes to Toronto. In the Native American language, Toronto means meeting place. This is exactly the feeling communicated by the capital of the province of Ontario. The entire world seems to be contained within this multicultural city. From the old Fort York, the view pans up to the tallest freestanding building in the world, the CN Tower, from which there are overwhelming views over the city's buildings and Lake Ontario. The Skydome is a massive stadium with an extendable roof that can be opened and closed as necessary. The nostalgic Royal York Hotel is a railway hotel of the old Canadian Pacific Railway Company and a direct underground connection to the train station. Canadian travels further west. A final glance at the CN Tower. And now the railway adventure can begin. This railroad was one of the most challenging undertakings in the history of the railways. In the dining car, its tables are being prepared for the next meal. Meanwhile, snacks are available. Comfort is second to none. The tracks across the prairie were laid relatively quickly. From their maintenance base in Winnipeg, the railroad construction trains travelled westwards. In 1872, British Columbia joined the Eastern Confederate Provinces on condition that within 10 years, a transcontinental railroad must be built. Not surprisingly, laying the tracks through the Rocky Mountains proved to be extremely difficult, and more than 12,000 workers were required to lay the railroad over Kicking Horse Pass. The Canadian Rocky Mountains are part of a gigantic and breathtaking mountain range which extends 4,500 kilometers from Alaska to Mexico. The luxurious railway hotel Chateau Lake Louise is a reminder of the glorious pioneering days of earlier times. These remote areas could only be reached by train. The railroad marked the beginning of Canada's tourist age. The train is ready to leave, and now it must traverse the final mountain stage. Three times a week, the Canadian, over 1 kilometre long and with 2 locomotives and 30 wagons, winds its way westwards to the Pacific coast. By dawn the next day, the train travels alongside the Fraser River. Next, the end of the line, Vancouver. A modern railway station welcomes the well-satisfied passengers. Originally, this city was not destined to be the end point of the railroad. Thus, Vancouver owes its very existence to the railway and has developed into the leading port on North America's west coast. Vancouver, the third largest city in Canada, and surely one of its most beautiful. A dynamic metropolis in a beautiful setting that enjoys not only a mild climate, but also a multicultural ambience. Here the long journey ends. For its new settlers, the railroad was the key to mid and west Canada, thanks to the pioneering spirit of this country's wonderful people.
London, An exciting and pulsating metropolis of the new millennium. A melting pot of both people and culture, and a fascinating city of diverse contrasts. The precious jewel of the British Crown, full of historic sites and cultural treasures. The City of London contains the Tower, an historic landmark with a remarkable history. A mighty medieval fortress with 13 towers. Throughout its 900 years, the tower has served many functions. From the Middle Ages, it was a heavily fortified prison. Dating back to Tudor times, the Beefeaters stand guard over the crown jewels and also assist the hordes of tourists who visit the tower. Close to the original main gate is the watery entrance of the famous Traitor's Gate, through which many prisoners first entered the tower's much-feared dungeons. The tower's ravens are protected by royal edict, as an ancient legend has it that the tower will survive for just as long as the ravens remain within its walls. It was here that some of the most important members of the British royal family were imprisoned and executed. The most famous victim of those cruel times was Anne Boleyn. Each of the towers has its own history, and each is connected to the other by way of massive walls. Together they form an eternal building. After the medieval St. Paul's Cathedral was destroyed by a devastating fire in 1666, Christopher Wren was ordered to rebuild it with a dome. During the 36 years of its construction, its design was frequently altered until finally a wonderful masterpiece of church architecture was created. And the cathedral provides a magnificent view across London town. The monument. This, the city's tallest freestanding stone column, is a reminder of the Great Fire of London that destroyed 4/5 of the city. In 4 days and nights, more than 13,000 buildings were destroyed. The monument was built on the site of the bakery in which the fire began. Westminster was originally London's second city, an additional centre of power along with the City of London. A district inspired by the construction of Westminster Abbey. The Abbey has witnessed the crowning and eventual interment of every English monarch. It was originally built as a Norman church and is London's oldest and most important church. Westminster Cathedral is different to the Abbey. It is a Catholic church that was re-established 300 years after the Reformation. A basilica of Romanic Byzantine design, with a red brick facade, green domes, and a panoramic campanile. Its interior is extremely colourful, various shades of marble and shining gold mosaics. It features more than 100 types of marble from all over the world. Located on the banks of the River Thames is the neo-Gothic Palace of Westminster. This splendid building served as a residence for the monarchy right up until the reign of King Henry VIII. It was once destroyed by fire but was rebuilt. Since 1547, it has been the seat of the English Parliament, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. Big Ben dates back to 1859 and is one of London's most famous landmarks. The tower derived its name from its 13-ton bell. When Parliament is in session, a lamp shines in the tower. The old district of St. James is full of historic charm. It includes the regal St. James Park that is now open to the general public. Henry VIII ordered that this former swampland be drained so that his French garden designers could create a marvelous royal park and enclosures for deer. Close to the park is the famous Horse Guards Parade, just one of the sights of London's daily changing of the guards. Only black horses take part. Dressed in their blood-red jackets and shining golden helmets, the guards are a truly impressive sight. Under the watchful eye of mounted policemen, the soldiers make their way to Buckingham Palace, a fine old tradition. Since the reign of Queen Victoria, Buckingham Palace has served as London's royal residence, the official living quarters and administrative offices of today's royal household. A garden of mulberry trees once grew here, and the Duke of Buckingham subsequently added a simple brick-built residence. Around 60 years later, George II purchased this site for his wife, and George IV eventually began to design an extensive palace complex. Today's front facade was originally the rear of the palace. The building contains 600 rooms and 1,000 windows. It was built at great expense and caused a financial scandal. The royal mastle contains the horses and carriages that are used for various royal ceremonies. 30 ceremonial horses are trained here. This exquisitely gilded fairy tale-like carriage is a remarkable focal point. It's the famous carriage that has been used to transport numerous English monarchs to their coronation in Westminster Abbey. There are around 70 historical carriages, landaus and light carriages within the large courtyards and halls of the Royal Mews. In the middle of the 19th century, architect John Nash designed Trafalgar Square as a large public area. In its centre is a 56-metre-high column in honour of Admiral Lord Nelson, who defeated Napoleon's fleet in 1805 at the Battle of Trafalgar. Once the location of the royal stables, this is now a place of huge fountains and ever-hungry pigeons. The square also contains the Church of St. Martin's in the Field and a museum. It has always been a popular location for political demonstrations. Thousands congregate here on New Year's Eve to welcome in the new year. The National Gallery in the northern section of the square contains more than 2,000 works of art. It is one of the largest art collections in the world. The Church of St. Martin in the Fields contains the mortal remains of several famous people. Piccadilly Circus is at the heart of this lively city with its theatres, bars and restaurants and constant flow of traffic. In the evening, an abundance of neon signs illuminate London's Piccadilly, a centre of attraction for the millions of tourists who come here each year. Leicester Square is part of Soho and has been the city's most popular entertainment district since the 17th century. It features large cinemas and the latest films, as well as gambling casinos and all kinds of attractions. A paradise of nocturnal entertainment. Soho also has its naughty side with exotic reviews, striptease and peep shows. Chinatown features arches and telephone booths that are crowned by pagoda-like roofs. Here, Chinese supermarkets and exotic restaurants are open well into the night. Covent Garden, now one of London's busiest areas, extremely popular with both Londoners and tourists alike. Once a lively fruit and vegetable market, and today a place of shops, restaurants and street entertainment. Both concerts and mechanical cabaret are very popular attractions here. Fascinating and somewhat farcical, bizarre and macabre. Neal Street contains a variety of alternative shops, from natural cosmetics to homeopathic medicines and vegetarian food to simple clothing. London is famous for its vast range of theatres and musicals. The West End contains a truly historic collection of magical theatres. Camden Market has become increasingly popular. Crowded, chaotic and multicultural. The home of cool and the latest fashions. It is here that extravagant designer shoes and clothing are sold before they're launched onto the mass marketplace. It's also popular for a tattoo or two. Weekends are frenetic here, and the area's shops, pubs and restaurants are always crowded. This is a place of the unusual, of arts and crafts, second-hand goods and valuable antiques. Camden Lock is a lock gate close to the market. From here, the Regent's Canal travels to London's Dockland. Those who travel on the canals must also operate the locks, but it's a worthwhile experience and a good way to travel across London. The Regent's Canal features boat trips from Camden Lock to Little Venice, a relaxing adventure with no hustle and bustle. In 1820, this canal connected the Grand Junction Canal in the west with London's docks in the east. It was designed by architect John Nash. The original route through Regent's Park was redirected, and now the canal travels alongside the park. The journey travels past various exclusive properties, and the canal banks are ideal for a leisurely stroll. The canal contains a growing number of houseboats. The green swathes of the park begin here. It's a popular area with one and all. Various side canals appear. It's difficult to believe that this tranquil setting is located in the middle of London. The boat gradually reaches its final destination, Little Venice, a small canal basin with romantic riverbanks, close to further locks. A relaxing area with tiny cafes and restaurants on both quays and boats. A dreamy area that lives up to its name. Officially part of central London, in 1820 Kensington was but a tiny village, and Hyde Park was a royal hunting ground. Victoria Station, the main station for the southern routes, was built during the reign of Queen Victoria, a junction of both trains and buses. In the middle of the 19th century, the new spirit of the age transformed the customary brick-stone design. Modern traffic regulations were introduced that are still in force today. Building design became more functional. Massive structures of steel marked the birth of a new era. The River Thames has always influenced life in London. The Millennium Bridge is the city's most recent bridge and the 16th to span the river. Shakespeare's Globe, a modern reconstruction of the circular Globe Theatre, has been built on almost the exact site of the original building. The new theatre was based on the original design. Its interior features natural light, a modest stage, and simple scenery. An adjoining museum displays old stage costumes and city plans. Numerous old lanes and buildings follow the course of the River Thames, an atmospheric reminder of bygone times. In a small inlet close to London Bridge is a clever replica of Sir Francis Drake's ship. It once featured in a motion picture. Southwark Cathedral was founded in the 12th century as a monastery church. The battleship HMS Belfast is now a floating museum. And Tower Bridge is not only a famous landmark, but also one of the city's most striking sights. A fascinating masterpiece of Victorian architecture. On each side, there are Gothic towers that are connected via a catwalk for pedestrians. Up until 1976, the lower main bridge was operated by a steam engine. Sightseeing trips embark from Westminster Pier in the shadow of Big Ben. The journey travels downriver to Greenwich. Beneath the impressive Tower Bridge past Greenwich Pier and the classical facade of the Royal Naval College. Next, the Millennium Dome, a modern eye-catching structure. It measures 320 meters in diameter, and in its center it is 50 meters tall. Its spun glass roof is supported by 12 90-meter-high columns. And then another gigantic complex, the Thames Flood Barrier. If the tide is excessive and a threat to London, a total of 10 locks can be operated to avert possible disaster. The Docklands train is a new addition and travels through this newly built area that was once the site of London's old docks. As the docks became redundant, its huge warehouses lay empty for several years. But today it features an imaginative array of splendid architecture. A passageway leads beneath the Thames from the Docklands train terminal to Greenwich, one of London's historic suburbs. The sightseeing boats also stop here, and the majestic clipper, the Cutty Sark, is on display by the pier. It once won the annual ocean-going China to London race. Greenwich is an elegant area with numerous restaurants, pubs, bookshops, markets and antique shops. The top of the hill in Greenwich Park is a popular destination, as it not only provides an extensive view of the River Thames, but it's also the home of the world-famous Greenwich Observatory. It's here that the zero meridian of our global chronology can be visited. But it's also a popular feeding ground for the local squirrels. The highlight of any holiday in London must be the largest Ferris wheel in the world, the London Eye. Situated on the banks of the Thames, it rises high into the sky opposite the Houses of Parliament and Big Ben. It was built for the new millennium, a technical masterpiece. This, the former centre of the largest empire in the world, is still a city of superlatives that attracts millions of visitors each year. Exciting both day and night. London, a modern city with age-old traditions and a long and colourful history.
Khiva, the eighth wonder of the world, an oasis city located on the ancient Silk Road. It was here that mathematician Mohammed lived, who, as Al-Khwarizmi, discovered algebra. Khiva is one of the greatest centres of ancient Khwarezm, land of the sun, in the west of today's Uzbekistan. An oriental city in which its greatest minaret, Kalta Minar, remains unfinished. Kokhna Ark, fortress of the Khan, is situated within the city walls. The condemned had to wait for their execution at its entrance. The Ark became a city within a city, with various reception courtyards and an elevated circular podium for the Khan's yurt. Even the small throne hall has been preserved, its wooden throne covered with fine silver leaf. Adjacent is the harem's courtyard and small hidden rooms of craftsmen. Of the castle's former towers, only the bastion of pure clay and wood has survived. From here, the enormity of the city walls that totally surround Khiva can be seen. Opposite the fort is one of the city's largest madrasas, whose construction was ordered by Khwarezmian Khan Muhammad Rahim, and tightrope acrobatics that first originated in Khiva are performed here right up to the present day. The History Museum contains costume jewellery, clothing, and old photographs of the city's strong men. The area of the inner city measures around 30 hectares, and its buildings lie close to the city wall. A mighty wall that is up to 10 metres high and 8 metres thick. The mighty North Gate and 3 further gates in each cardinal direction are the entrances to the fortified historic centre, the Ichen Kala. Both walls and gates provided the city's residents and their guests with good protection. The minaret and Friday Mosque were built upon the foundations of the city's earliest 10th century buildings. An archaic mosque design with a low hall whose flat roof is supported by 212 columns. Some of the wooden pillars come from an ancient mosque of the neighbouring town of Kath, which was washed away by devastating floods. Some columns contain Kufi fonts. A uniquely atmospheric place. Beyond the mosque is the ancient mausoleum of Jewish Sheikh Said Alavudin and his guard. Unlike the Pahlavan Mahmud mausoleum, this one was originally built in simple form to commemorate the famous 14th century poet, and from the 19th century came the necropolis of the reigning Khan dynasty of Kungrad. It has become a much visited pilgrimage site. The new mausoleum now contains the ancient tomb, and Chanaka, with its high double domes, is quite remarkable. According to medieval architectural tradition, Khiva is divided into two parts: downtown Ichankala and outer town Dichankala, where the city's residents live and work. Almost 1,500 years of Oriental culture are hidden within the intriguing, winding streets of this fine oasis city. Outside the southern gate, the fortress walls contain semicircular towers. And near the eastern gate, domes indicate bathhouses. The well-preserved Eastern Gate is always a hive of activity, as the Grand Bazaar is located just outside the city wall. Numerous craftsmen offer their services in this area. Among one of the city's madrasas, Kutluk Muradinok is one of the oldest, and the courtyard's fountain is still in use. A small white mosque acts as a connecting link to the nearby madrasa of Alukali Khan. He had this magnificent madrasa built alongside a large caravanserai. The merchants were impressed. Merchandise is still traded here. Tosh Hovli, the stone yard, was the main palace of Olokuli Khan, a complex with several courtyards of various sizes. The Mechmonchona was reserved for official receptions, with numerous columns and majolica walls. The living and sleeping area of the Khan looks rather cramped in comparison to the large courtyard and rooms of the harem. The elevated section for the Khan's yurt fills the small courtyard, whose walls and iwan are decorated with majolica tiles. Power and progress are depicted here, and from these a unique style of architecture developed. Despite its varied history, the mysterious city of Khiva has preserved the exoticism of ancient times and continues to be a traditional Islamic oasis city.
As if to highlight its special significance, and situated in the small Finnish town of Kerimäki, the Kerimäen kirkko proudly rises into the sky. Here, close to the fascinating lake district of the Savonlinna region, the inhabitants of Kerimäki wanted to have a church that was a little different. "45 meters long and 42 meters wide, Kerimäki Church is the largest timber-built Christian church in the world. It is believed that it is the fourth or fifth religious building of Kerimäki's evangelic Lutheran community to have been built here. The airy, spacious interior of the cross-shaped church has been dominated since 1890 by a central altar painting by Alexandra Sultin. The church's motto is contained within the altarpiece and quotes the words of Jesus Christ. "Come unto me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Both the words of Jesus and the Kerimäen kirkko itself do indeed seem to have a calming effect on those who visit this remarkable wooden church. There has been much speculation with regard to the enormous dimensions of this church that measures 37 meters to the roof. It was thought by many that its over-generous proportions were the result of an architectural mistake. One theory in particular was popular for some time. It was believed that the farmers of the region, who had played an important role in the construction of the church, had wrongly interpreted the building plans. It was thought that the original specifications set by the church's architect, Granset, had been erroneously converted not in feet, but in meters by the local builders. Since then, this story has been shown to be untrue. In fact, the true reason for the unusually large dimensions of this timber-built church were far more rational than had been thought. "1844 marked the beginning of the construction of the new Kerimäen kirkko that was under the supervision of a builder, Axel Magnus Tolpo. The impressive frames of the roof and its beautiful wooden supports testify to the skill and attention to detail of the local carpenters. The building of Kerimäki's wooden church was the achievement of the entire church community, as each member of the local neighborhood took part in its construction. Every employable man aged between 15 and 60 assisted in the work. They created a truly impressive building. After only 3 years of construction, the church was completed in 1847, and at Pentecost the following year it was inaugurated. With a total of 20 registers, the organ was produced by a famous Finnish organ company in Kangasala and first came into use in 1894. As excess heat could damage this wonderful wooden church, the evangelical Lutheran community of Kerimäki use it only in the summer months. It really is a fascinating place. Its pews add up to a total length of 1,670 meters. Frederick Neovius, a former minister of the parish, was responsible for the dimensions of this timber-built church, as he wished to simultaneously gather as many people within his church as was possible. It was also intended to permit visitors to the local markets to take part in the church services, as they were important to the everyday life of Kerimäki. As is true today, there was certainly no shortage of wood in this densely forested region, a fact that facilitated the realization of the plans for this massive church. The wooden pews can seat a congregation of more than 3,000. In fact, it has been known for Kerimäki to accommodate up to 5,000. The freestanding bell tower was also given large dimensions by its designers, as it rises above the already high church by several meters. The bell tower is open to the public and provides visitors with an impressive view of the largest timber-built church in the world. Along with the bell tower, the Kerimäki creates a harmonious unity in a wonderful setting of trees and is justifiably Kerimäki's most spoken about and fascinating landmark.